Hi, and welcome back if you've been watching these every week, twice a week. Or welcome in if you're new. Today's video is special as it's a 1-year anniversary of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. For most of you, the war in Ukraine started on February 24th, 2022, 365 days ago. For most of us in Ukraine, the war started on April 6th, 2014, when Russia invaded Donbas. But today we're going to talk about the full-scale invasion, the one that all of you know about. And the brief today is going to be divided: the past, the present, and what the future holds. With that, hi, my name is Yewleea and you're watching The Brief, where we normally talk about everything that happened in and around Ukraine in the past week so far in about 20 minutes. But today, we're gonna talk about the past year. Let's go! It's been 365 days of the world watching the Ukrainian suffering, and here is a summary of everything that happened in this time frame. Russia failed to take Kyiv in 3 days. Russia failed to take Kyiv in a year. Russia failed to capture the whole of Ukraine. And now they're preparing a plan that they call land in exchange for peace. Internal destabilization of Ukraine is the only salvation for Russia from military defeat. The Kremlin is launching a virus, the idea of the possibility of a compromise, on international platforms and inside Ukraine. The Russian Federation promotes the idea of Ukraine renouncing the territories of Donetsk, Luhansk regions, and Crimea in exchange for the end of the war. But the war will never end if Ukraine renounces these territories, because one of the reasons that Ukrainians call February 24th the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, not the beginning of the war, is because for us, this is the 9th year of war, and this video illustrates perfectly exactly what has been going on in this time.
The first 8 years of war, Russia didn't take control of Kyiv, not in 3 days as predicted, nor in a year of a full-scale invasion, nor in the previous 8 years of the Russo-Ukrainian War. In 2014, Russia occupied Crimea and part of Luhansk and Donetsk regions, calling them LDBR. After the epic Donetsk airport defense, unbreakable Ukrainian troops got named cyborgs. Around Ilovaisk, Russians violated the agreements and killed hundreds of retreating Ukrainian military. UAF liberated Slovyansk, Kramatorsk, Mariupol, and many other cities. Meanwhile, Russian terrorists shot down the Malaysian Boeing. Almost 2 million people had to resettle. Peace negotiations led to Minsk agreements regularly violated by Russians, while adhered to by Ukrainians, as it reduced the intensity of hostilities. Every year, the number of civilians killed in the war was steadily decreasing. Ukraine spent over 8 years negotiating with Russia, yet Kremlin started a full-scale invasion anyway. So now it has to be stopped once and for all, not giving Russia a pause to gather strength, but only through complete victory over evil.
The answer is simple. If Ukraine cedes its territory to Russia, the war is not going to end. It's just going to enter back into the stage of 2014. And it's not going to end the suffering of Ukrainian people. It's only going to prolong it. And suffering Ukraine has seen much. Ukrainian children have spent 920 hours. Ukrainian children have spent an average of 920 hours in bomb shelters this past year. 920 hours is 38 days combined. And sometimes the air alerts were so long that they would be in the shelters for 8 hours a day, unable to go outside and see the sunlight. The air alerts in Ukraine were announced more than 16,000 times, with an average duration of an hour each. And I guess the karmic payback for that is that in the first days of the full-scale invasion, Russia has shot down several of its own planes. And that's why the country was lacking pilots with experience in conducting hostilities with the ground forces. And Vadim Skibitsky only confirmed these statements, saying it's true. And main military intelligence director of Ukraine even heard the intercepts of phone calls where Russians were talking about accidentally shooting down their own helicopters, their own planes, from artillery, from tanks, from everything. But unfortunately, that in no way compensates for the fact that in the last year of war, Russia has fired over 5,000 missiles over the skies of Ukraine. They also made over 1,100 strikes using drones. In general, since the beginning of the full-scale armed aggression, the Russian occupying forces have carried out almost 5,000 missiles and almost 3,500 airstrikes on objects on the territory of Ukraine. And a good portion of these landed in Mariupol. the city that we now know as the martyr of the war in Ukraine. The once beautiful and developing port city on the Sea of Azov that today rests in complete ruins and in Russian occupation, where people live without water, electricity, walls, heat, food, and Russia tries to portray itself as a savior who is rebuilding the same city that they have flattened to the ground. But the armed forces of Ukraine have some good news regarding that. Mariupol is no longer out of reach for our army, at least when it comes to strikes. From February 21st to 23rd, there was a series of large explosions in Mariupol, particularly in the area of the seaport where Russians store their ammunition. And here's what the NSDC Secretary Alexei Danilov had to say about that. Periodically, in Mariupol, what should happen, happens. Our military destroys Russian terrorists who invaded our city called Mariupol. He also noted that Ukraine can strike either 100 kilometers or 150 kilometers, or even a little more. So now, a lot of Ukrainian territories under occupation are no longer out of reach. And speaking of the occupied territories, Ukraine has identified 16,226 children that have been abducted from those territories. According to the Ombudsman for Children's Rights, the actual number of children abducted to the territory of Russia may very well be in the hundreds of thousands, but only 307 of them were returned back home. It is also reported that 461 children have died and 920 were injured due to Russia's aggression. And it looks like that number may only continue rising as Russia continues shelling Ukrainian cities. Their latest target was a bus stop in Kherson, where there are already 6 people who have been identified as dead. And the reason why I bring up this particular occurrence is because when talking about everything that happened this year resulting from the Russian aggression, one of the images that everybody has seen and everybody knows is an image of a woman's hand in Bucha. And today, while looking at the images from Kherson, I noticed quite literally the same image there. So it's been 365 days of war, and Russian tactics, Russian aggression, and Russian inhumanity is still the same. And the last on the docket of this summary is this number. 350,000 is the amount of Russian troops that are currently involved on the territory of Ukraine. Now that we've covered the horrors of the past, some of the horrors of the past. Honestly, if we were gonna talk about everything that Russia has done to Ukraine in the past year alone, I would probably be here for 24 hours trying to make an informational dent. Hi, special announcement today. Of course, don't forget to give this video a like, leave a comment, subscribe to my channel, and turn on all of your notifications. But also, please go and check out my website, Yewleea.com, where I have launched a new line of merchandise in support of the armed forces of Ukraine. All of the items such as sweatpants, hoodies, t-shirts, and mugs are Ukraine-themed, but not cheesy. Can you imagine that? And 50% of the profits go to support the causes of the armed forces of our country. The line features designs from 5 different artists, and they're going to rotate every 3 months. So grab yourself a hoodie while they last, help the armed forces, make me happy, and I will be incredibly and eternally grateful. Thank you. Let's talk a little about the present. We remember, and we will not forgive. The National Bank of Ukraine issued a $20 bill for the anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. It depicts the figures of 3 Ukrainian soldiers raising the national flag against the background of fragments of the map of Ukraine and the flags of the countries that support us. Above it is the text in Ukrainian and English. On February 24th, 2022, a new stage of armed aggression against Ukraine began with the full-scale invasion of the Russian army. The People's War for the Independence and Sovereignty of Ukraine has been going on since 2014. It is also a war for a civilizational choice. Ukraine defends its belonging to the European civilization and, at the same time, those fundamental values, rights, and freedoms which are the basis of the Western world. And a lot of countries decided to support Ukraine's message today and show their solidarity with our country. For instance, in London, in front of the Russian embassy, the road was painted with the colors of the Ukrainian flag. But not just painted. The paint was quite literally spilled on the road, and every car that passed by dragged those colors further and further. Take a look.
Ой, у лузі червона калина похилилася. Чогось наша славна Україна зажурилася, а ми твою червону калину підіймемо, а ми нашу славну Україну гей-гей розвеселимо, а ми твою стрілецькую славу збережемо, а ми нашу славну Україну гей-гей розвеселимо, а ми твою стрілецькую славу збережемо, а ми нашу славну Україну гей-гей розвеселимо.
The EU has started to block ways for Russia to circumvent the sanctions. They finally realized that all of those countries that have not sanctioned Russia, that are very close to it territorially, suddenly started buying way more imported goods. And the EU is now realizing that those goods do not stay in those countries, so they're going to crack down on those imports. In Germany, the Russian consulate was painted with bloody symbols of the war against Ukraine. Despite the fact that the Z symbol was actually invented by the Russians, the Russian consulate called these drawings a disgusting act of vandalism and filed a complaint with the German law enforcement authorities. An investigation was launched. The funny thing is that how is this a disgusting act of vandalism if your Z swastika was painted on your consulate? Doesn't that reflect Russia? Isn't the Z painted on every building and billboard and subway station in Moscow and St. Petersburg anyway? What are you so uptight about? I thought you would love it. The Russian embassy in Berlin had a surprise too. An installation called Ruski Mir was launched right in front of it. It is designed to explain the danger of the ideology of the Russian world to European society. In addition, the organizers also published the newspaper Ruski Mir Zeitung, which contains original materials from the Russian mass media translated into German. This newspaper demonstrates the level of propaganda carried out by the Russian Federation inside the country. I don't think there is enough paper in Germany to honestly depict all Russian propaganda in a Zeitung or newspaper, but that's a good start. Meanwhile, in Cologne though, after a 2-year break due to the pandemic, the Rose Parade or Shrove Monday took place as part of the Cologne Carnival. One of the key topics was Russian military aggression against Ukraine, and one of the main characters of the satirical platforms was Russian President Vladimir Putin. And as a very big blow to Russian propaganda, Romania suspended the work of the Russian Center for Culture and Science due to their manipulation of public opinion. The center deliberately participated in actions that were aimed at distorting the perception of reality and historical truth on the level of public opinion in Romania. These actions have recently intensified and acquired new, more serious accents, so Romania put an end to it. And for good reason, because according to multiple studies, Russia spends $1.5 billion on mass media a year. By mass media, we mean the Russian state-sponsored media, aka propaganda. But it looks like the propaganda is not nearly as effective on some of Russia's troops, because due to the failure in Vuhledar, some of the Russian occupiers refused to advance. They wrote a letter, and I'm going to read it to you. In connection with the failure of the offensive and significant losses in manpower near Vuhledar, the personnel of the volunteer so-called Cossack detachment, which was attached to the 155th Marine Brigade of the Pacific Fleet, refuses to further participate in the offensive. And according to the Institute for the Study of War, there is another hiccup. The Russians have lost their priority to capture the territories of Zaporizhia region as well. Apparently, PMC Wagner swapped out their regular troops, the convicts, with the Dagestani and Ossetian troops, which are poorly trained and exhausted from other offensives, and such a swap indicates that the priority for this region has been lost. But despite the huge losses, lots of failures, and practically no gains in the past year, Russia is not interested in ending the war. The ex-ambassador to Moscow from the United States, John Sullivan, shared his opinion on whether Putin was ever wanting to negotiate. The goal of the so-called special military operation was the liquidation of the authorities in Kyiv, and again the so-called demilitarization of Ukraine, that is in fact the enslavement of Ukrainian people. And that goal hasn't changed since then. But there was no reaction from their side. They only repeated the theses that they learned by heart. It looked like some kind of farce. Putin needs to be convinced that he cannot win. Meanwhile, he believes he can win because he has a longer planning horizon. The United States had an answer to that earlier, as they said that they will be supporting Ukraine indefinitely, and time is not on his side. And in order to demonstrate to Russians what it's like living in a war zone and the reality they have created for Ukrainians, our hackers have hacked the Russian radio with an air alert. On the morning of February 22nd, 10 Russian cities announced an air alert and a threat of a missile strike on the radio, courtesy of yours truly, Ukrainian hackers.
Внимание! Внимание! Объявляется воздушная тревога. Всем немедленно проследовать в укрытие. Внимание! Внимание! Угроза ракетного удара.
And while Russians were scared of a possibility of faux missile strikes, Ukrainians had a look into their bright future.
Report, Kyiv stands strong. Kyiv stands proud. It stands tall. And most important, it stands free.
And speaking of the future, as we all might know, China has rolled out their peace plan that we're not even going to talk about because it is basically the same rhetoric as Russia with the peace talks and peace negotiations and basically Ukraine ceding territory, but we're going to talk about Zelensky's response to that. He said, "Thank you, we have our own peace formula and we expect that on February 23rd, it'll be supported by all states, including China, at the UN meeting." Slam dunk. Then you all must have heard about Putin's speech that he delivered recently, but I'm not going to cover that. Why? Because it is just as irrelevant as most Russian people found showing up to it. Take a look at this beautiful empty hall. Putin famously considers himself Peter the First. He thought he was gonna go down in history for annexing Crimea in 2014. Quite literally, he thought it was a historical event that was gonna bring him fame and love and support of the Russian people and the international community. It did go down in history as the first step towards the collapse of Russia. Russia's foreign minister Sergei Lavrov once said that Putin has 3 advisors: Peter the First, Ivan the Terrible, and Catherine the, I'm not gonna call her great, the second. But all of those leaders have been disgraced this year as some of the biggest lies known to history. I guess the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And it looks like he might not only be disgraced on the international arena, but finally in Belarus too. A group of various journalists from different publications said that they got access to an internal document of the Russian authorities titled Strategic Goals of the Russian Federation in the Direction of Belarus, and this document consists of 17 pages. It contains political, defense, trade, and social goals of the Russian Federation in Belarus. In layman's terms, Russia wants to take full control of Belarus by 2030. A friend and a partner, huh? These goals are divided into short term until 2022, medium term until 2025, and long term until 2030. Enjoy, Lukashenko. Enjoy. And Russia's military and imperialistic aspirations are just the reason why the Council of the European Union decided to extend the sanctions against the Russian Federation until 2024. And then before the grand UN meeting that all of us have been waiting for, Antonio Guterres has made a speech. It is time to step back from the abyss. Complacency will only exacerbate the crisis and further undermine our shared principles. War is not a solution. War is a problem. People in Ukraine are suffering a lot. Ukrainians, Russians, and people far beyond the borders of Ukraine need peace, Guterres said. Well, I mean, the peace in Ukraine is kind of in the hands of Russian people, but we have no faith in them anymore. We have faith in ourselves. The one thing I agree with him on 100% is that he called the Russian invasion of Ukraine an insult to the world's collective consciousness. And then Danish Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen echoed his words in one of the greatest addresses at the UN. Let's be honest about the problem before us. It is about the protection of international law, the protection of the UN Charter, and the protection of peace. We will not be neutral when we are asked to side with the UN, its charter, and the victims of aggression. As the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu said, if you are neutral in a situation of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. And that concluded in the UN General Assembly overwhelmingly supporting the Ukrainian resolution that calls on the Russian Federation to cease all of its hostilities on the territory of Ukraine and take its troops back home. It also enshrines the main provisions of the Ukrainian peace formula. 141 out of 193 countries voted in favor. Only 7 voted against. And that is only the beginning of the good news that is waiting for Ukraine in the near future. The G7 countries decided to give Ukraine more money than pledged earlier. In December, the number was 32 billion. Now it is 39. And then during the meeting in Warsaw, the leaders of the Bucharest Nine supported Ukraine's Euro-Atlantic Union integration aspirations and called Russia the most significant and direct threat to the members of the alliance. The US then pledged its support to Ukraine even after the presidential elections in 2024. Here is what Derek Chollet had to say. Support to Ukraine will continue even after the US presidential elections scheduled for 2024. Even if the candidate from the Republican Party wins these elections, both the Democratic and Republican parties have no doubts about the need to provide aid to Ukraine. And then Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, concluded that Ukraine will become a member of NATO, and the work for that can be started now. On the way to NATO membership, it is necessary to provide Ukraine with more standard NATO equipment, as well as to ensure the interoperability of all the forces of different countries and how they use the equipment, so the training of Ukrainian pilots in NATO tactics is also part of this process. Overall, despite a year of incredibly huge, traumatic, and incomprehensible losses, Ukraine is looking bright into the future. My mom always says that after the darkest night comes the brightest light. Obviously, we wish and we hoped that it wouldn't have to come to this, for Ukraine to join Europe, for Ukraine to join NATO, for Russia to be weakened to the point that it cannot attack anyone else again. But if our losses, our sweat, our blood, and our sacrifices result in a better collective world tomorrow, then it was all worth it. When Ukraine defeats Russia, when the war is over, when we are a member of the EU and NATO, when Russia has hopefully fallen apart, when it completely collapsed, when Russian minorities gained a chance to live in their own independent countries, with their own independent decisions, when the world is peaceful again and Russia is no longer a threat, then Ukraine will feel like we did all of this for the better good. And then we will be able to start healing. And with that, that's all I have for you for today. But today I have a special message. On my website, Yewleea.com, that I have attached in the description of the video below, there is a new line of merchandise, 50% of profits from which are going to go to support the armed forces of Ukraine. Every month on Twitter, we'll be doing a vote for a cause to which those profits will be donated. And every month I will be posting a transparency post in a section of the website that will show you exactly how much money went to which cause, so you know what you're spending your money on. Don't forget to check out the website and grab yourself a hoodie, a t-shirt, a mug, or a pair of sweatpants. And if you're gonna do all that, don't forget to also like the video, leave a comment, subscribe to my channel, and turn on all of your notifications so you don't miss when the next one comes out. And as always, check your sources and don't fall for propaganda, especially now that the troll activity is super high. And I will see you next time.